So as you started to reflect on the fish in the fish bowl, maybe you thought, well, the fish is of course confined to the fish bowl. He lives in water. And this can be a metaphor for culture in that we are also sort of confined to our culture in a way until we decide to leave it. All right. So we rely on our surroundings. We're actually unaware of our surroundings until we can take another perspective and look at our surroundings from a different perspective. The fish lives in water. The water is essential for his life, but at the same time, the water makes him who he is and what he is. He's grown gills because he lives in water. And in the same way, when we live in our own culture, we adapt to our own culture. We are what we are and who we are because of our own culture and because of our own surroundings. So it's actually not easy at all to go beyond our fishbowl, go beyond our culture. And this is why we have the saying in English, you feel like a fish out of water. So when we go beyond our culture, when we take a step out of our comfort zone, this is when we feel uncomfortable. But this is also a good step toward intercultural competence and toward an intercultural experience. So as an example of the water sort of tainting the way we see things, the concept of time is very cultural. So for example, as I grew up in the United States, time is essential. We go by time. Everyone is usually on time for many important things. When we go to a restaurant, things are served to us in a timely fashion. When I moved to Spain, their concept of time is quite different. So things are a bit slower. It's acceptable to be late to social engagements, to meetings, and even business meetings, slightly late. And when you sit down at a restaurant, they serve you when it's convenient. Yeah, it's not immediate, and it's not as timely as I was used to. And so when we step out of our comfort zone and we see things from a different perspective, we have to force ourselves to see things from another perspective and not just think that, well, maybe that's rude or maybe that's, not acceptable. It's just a different way of living. Okay. So after this brief reflection on culture, let's step back to intercultural competence. When we mix with other people of different cultures, there's always an element of incomplete knowledge, incomplete comprehension. We don't understand why their concept of time might be different, for example. But if we can manage these differences in an effective way, in a respectful way, then we are displaying intercultural competence. The point is, or the objective is, to appropriately and effectively manage these interactions. So with someone who is different in some way, and these differences could come from any orientation, from a different nationality, a different race, a different ethnicity, tribe, religion, region. I find it interesting that even within the same countries, there are different cultures. I'm sure, knowing that in India there are so many different languages, I'm sure that there are very different cultures regionally. Here in Spain, it's the same way. From north to south, there are different cultures and different ways of seeing things and doing things, and also urban to rural, for example. That's another cultural difference. And so when we mix with people from different cultural backgrounds, different nationalities, different regions, we want to do it in an appropriate way, in an effective way that can lead to collaboration, that can lead to mutual understanding. Okay, and this is of course necessary when we think of diplomacy, when we think of collaboration. This is the opposite of ethnocentrism. And this is what we're working toward, yet it isn't a very simple task. It's quite difficult, in fact. We don't need to know everything about the other culture. We don't need to become bicultural or even tricultural, pluricultural, because it's quite, I would say, nearly impossible to to know everything we need to know about other cultures with whom we're interacting, but we can still interact in a respectful way and an effective way. And this is what we're aiming for. So how can we further define intercultural competence, which is, as I've said, quite complex? There are many different models that define intercultural competence. What you see here is one example. I'm going to show you this example and also another one, which I think the two together are very, are rather complete, and I think it gives you a complete idea of what is intercultural competence and the complexity of the concept. This model is a compositional model, which means that it gives you the different competences, the different skills that make up intercultural competence. Intercultural competence is generally defined as a set of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And you can see that reflected in this first pyramid model of intercultural competence, which was first published by Deerdorf in 2006. You can see here that it's a sort of pyramid shape because the idea is that each component of intercultural competence builds upon the next, or builds upon the previous, I should say. So that at the bottom, the very first block that we have to build would be our requisite attitudes. We cannot develop intercultural competence until we have gained respect, we have opened ourselves to intercultural learning logically, and we have developed our own curiosity and desire for discovery. Once we have those basic attitudes, then we're able to go on to the next step, which would be knowledge and comprehension. So we're looking for deep understanding and knowledge of culture. What is culture? And perhaps if we're aiming toward a specific culture, perhaps knowledge of that specific culture, or knowledge of several cultures, whatever seems to be our goal. Not only understanding and knowing about other cultures, but also understanding and knowing about our own culture and being self-aware of our own culture. Because again, with the fish in the fishbowl, if we don't understand that our own water, our own culture will be skewing our view of the world, it's difficult to realize and to fully understand other cultures. That said, of course, we can't know fully and deeply all cultures, but we can start to build some knowledge. As we move up to the next step and the next building block, we can have internal changes, and those internal changes can take the form of adaptability. We're gaining the ability to adapt to other communication styles, other behaviors, other environments. We can gain flexibility and be okay with different realities, different ways of thinking. We gain an ethno-relative view, which is the opposite of ethnocentric, and we gain empathy. We develop empathy, which is essential. As we change inside, we also change our external views and our external behavior. And so we gain the ability to behave and communicate effectively and appropriately with people of other cultures. And we gain the ability to work together toward a common goal with someone who is different from us. This is one very influential model, and I'd like to show you one other influential model, which is the Intercultural Communicative Competence model by Byram, which was published in 1997 originally. And this model connects intercultural competence more directly with what you were saying at the beginning with the other language competences. And so we can see that intercultural competence is one more competence that is very much related and very much equally as important as sociolinguistic competence, linguistic competence, discourse competence, these other communicative competences that we have traditionally taught and traditionally developed in our classes, in our English classes. But all of these other blocks are leading up to and building up to intercultural competence. So starting with the most basic, which would be, he divides them into 5 savoirs. And so the first would be knowledge, meaning knowledge of social groups in our own culture and the other cultures, knowledge about the general interaction process, knowledge about cultures in general. All right, and then we would also have, of course, attitudes. You can see that many of these concepts are reflected in the different models, just in different ways. Attitudes such as curiosity, such as openness, the ability and the readiness to suspend belief, to suspend belief of our own culture, to suspend beliefs when we look at other cultures. And if we jump down here to interpreting and relating skills, this is learning to interpret symbols and events in other cultures. If we look at a cultural event, we're able to interpret perhaps the symbols that we see. If we see a religious procession here in Spain, we can interpret the figures, interpret the meaning behind some of the symbols and some of the traditions and things that we see. We can also relate those interpretations to our own culture and make comparisons. When we go to discovery and interaction skills, then we're looking at the ability to know where to look to discover further information. We can find sources, reliable sources that will help us understand the foreign cultures. We can apply this knowledge in real time as we're communicating with someone of that other culture. And so we have the discovery or the research, the understanding, and on the other hand, we have the actual interaction. In this model, it's very emphasized the interaction between people, between cultures. So this is why it's very much rooted in communicative competence. So it recognizes the fact that intercultural competence is going to be especially important when there is interaction between people and between people of different cultures specifically. The final savoir is the most difficult, the most cognitively challenging, the most complex, and all of the others sort of build up to this one, and this is critical cultural awareness. We can relate it to critical thinking, evaluative thinking. So we are working toward evaluating the perspectives, evaluating the practice and products from the different cultures that we're exposed to, including our own. And so this is a sort of a political engagement, understanding politics, understanding intercultural exchanges, collaboration, also critically evaluating those interactions, critically evaluating all of the different perspectives. So you can see how it's much more complex and something that we have to build up to. Okay, and so I'd like to argue that all of these savoirs, all of these components of intercultural competence, are something that we need to be developing throughout our lives. It's not something that we can do immediately. It's not something we can do in just a year or two. It's something that we should start from a young age and develop through many years. And so we can also as we continue to define intercultural competence, we can think about the relationship with language, as Byram connected it very well to communicative competence, and I think correctly identified it as one of the competences that go within communicative competence. We can also think of becoming plurilingual and developing interculturality as a process that is very much intertwined. In the Common European Framework of Reference, this is our reference here in Europe for learning languages, any language, any foreign language, and it's quite important. It's an important document for us. This document defines the intercultural competence in this way. It very much relates it to becoming plurilingual, a person learning other languages, because when you learn a foreign language, when you learn a second language, you learn a different perspective and you learn a different way of seeing things, of describing things. Because in the end, language is a way of describing, a way of naming, a way of communicating. And so it allows you to see things from a different perspective. And since language is inherent in culture, and culture is very inherent in language, then we can say that when we become plurilingual, when we become bilingual, trilingual, and plurilingual, we also become intercultural in some way. So we gradually, as we learn these languages, we gradually develop intercultural awareness, the skills, and the know-how, as it says here. And so how can we do this? I'd like to present a few, briefly, a little bit of a more practical view of how we can possibly do this in our classes, in our educational settings. We can help our students develop their intercultural competence in many, many ways. And I'd like to propose several ways that we can do things on our own in our own classrooms, and other ways that we can do things together with others and together with other people. The main objective, I think, is to expose our students to other realities and have them be aware that there are other realities, that many people live in many different ways around the world, and that they're all acceptable. There's not one way that's better than the other, they're just different. And I think that we can do this without even leaving the classroom, in fact. So what we can do, we should do many different things, and I'm going to propose a few of how to test their tolerance, how to test their ability to change their perspective, to look at things from a different angle, from a different perspective. But I think as teachers and as educators, we need to challenge their beliefs and challenge the things that they have believed in their lives just because this is where they grew up. So if we can challenge their own beliefs and allow them to see others' beliefs, then this is another way toward intercultural competence. If we can ask them to reflect on their own culture and relativize their own culture, then we're able to slowly develop their intercultural competence. And so we can do this through several ways. Here on the left, we see a list which we'll look at one by one, and then we'll look at other ways to do this together with others. One thing we can do is use authentic materials in our classrooms. Authentic materials are texts which are meant for native speakers of a language, or for the general public. It's something that's not adapted to language learners, so not something that you would find in a textbook. Authentic materials can be found in our everyday lives, so that and now with the internet, now with technology, it's possible to find them quite easily on the internet. And if we travel, we can pick things up. I like to bring things from my hometown, and use them in my classes, because my students are motivated by them. They enjoy seeing things that are a little bit different, that are more meaningful. I have stories behind them. I can share these different things with them, and it makes it much more personal and much more motivating, I think. But if we can bring authentic materials into our classroom, we can allow our students the chance to interpret these cultural symbols. If, for example, on a map, maybe the symbols are slightly different on a map from one region to another of the world. We have, for example, tickets for a concert, tickets for a museum, a restaurant menu, all different sort of texts, all different text types, all different, descriptions. persuasive texts, all different texts that could be procedural texts, all different texts that could be very cultural in nature, but also useful for teaching a foreign language. And if we use these in an interesting way and sort of encourage our students to ask why, to really ask interesting questions about these texts, then we can use them to develop their intercultural competence. We can ask why certain cultural phenomena, why are the tickets printed in this way? Why do we have sporting events in the way that we do, etc. These type of materials provide very rich and meaningful language, which is authentic, which is from a native source, and we can use them for communicative activities. We can even compare them with similar things from our own culture. We could have, for example, a museum brochure and compare it to one from our local museum. And so this will encourage students to make comparisons, see differences, and start to gain perspective. Another material that we can use is multicultural literature. Literature, of course, is traditionally used as teaching a foreign language, but if we go beyond using just the target culture literature and using literature from all over the world, I think this can be a very enriching material and resource. So I have here the image of Chimamanda Adichie. She made a TED Talk. If you haven't seen it, I would very much recommend it, about the single story. And she basically said that we as humans, as people, we tend to have a single story about many other cultures that are not well known in the world. And so we have a single story, a single image in our heads of what that culture must be like. And so if we can allow students to go beyond that single story by delving into literature about those countries that are lesser known, about those cultures that are lesser understood, then I think we can also develop intercultural competence. I did a brief survey of some of the literature about some of the research done about English as a foreign language or English as a second language textbooks. And interestingly, a lot of research has shown that there's a dominance of target culture, English-speaking countries' culture, of course, logically, British, American culture and text. Though there are some research that show a dominance of source culture or local culture. But I think that if not many showed other cultures. So cultures that are not directly related to the English language or the local culture. And since there is no clear tendency, we can't make generalizations, but at the same time, if we have a representation of all international contexts, it could be very enriching for our students. If we use this literature, if we use these materials in such a way that we encourage our students to ask questions, to discuss the topics, to engage with these materials, they can be very, very, very powerful. And so if we think back to the savoirs, which you have in the middle of the screen, knowledge, attitudes, interpreting or relating, discovery and interaction, critical cultural awareness. These 5 things can be developed by these practices that you have at the bottom. If we use these materials and have a discussion about why they are the way they are, or about the comparison between the foreign materials and our local materials, we start to ask questions that are probing into why things are the way they are, researching answers about those questions, but researching that goes beyond stereotypes. It's easy when we think of culture to stay with the stereotypes of certain cultures that we all know. And unfortunately, those stereotypes can't capture what truly is the culture. So we need to help our students go beyond the stereotypes, look for reliable sources, look for first-hand sources that can actually explain cultural phenomena in a deeper way that goes beyond the superficial or the biased. We can also do simulations and role play. We can have intercultural situations set up, communicative situation, in which we role play, for example, an interaction between cultures. Ask them to see things from another point of view. One can be from their local point of view, and one could be from a foreign point of view. And you could create a role play in that sense. And this can be very eye-opening and enriching, I think. One way we can also do this is just an example, but as I said before, part of intercultural competence is also challenging our own customs, our own beliefs, or at least being aware of them. Even, of course, we're not asking them to suspend their own beliefs, or not asking them to believe anything different from what they do believe. The idea is to step back from their own customs or their own beliefs, be aware that they have them and that they also skew their view of the world, and they influence their thinking. And so one way to ask our students to be more aware of their own customs, of their own traditions, is this simple activity that you see here. And I've done this many times with my students, and it's a bit of fun, but it's also, I think, more difficult than they expect at the beginning, and a little bit challenging. If we ask them to take any local cultural custom that they have, and there's many, I'm sure you can think of several that you have in your own country. If they take the local cultural custom and they have to explain it to a foreigner in English. Imagine that they found a tourist in the street, they're asking what's happening, and they have to explain it to this foreign person in English. This raises quite a few questions that are very interesting. What will this foreigner understand about what I'm saying? There are many, many terms usually for local customs and local traditions that do not have a direct translation to English or any foreign language. How can I explain those terms? How can I explain these concepts to someone who doesn't understand my local language? And also, why? Why do we have this tradition? Where does it come from? Who takes part? In what way? There are so many questions that could be answered, that the foreign person could be asking us. This can be an interesting role play, or if you're lucky enough to have a foreign person that is in your classroom or can come to your classroom to actually do this, it's another great exercise. So you can see, I think, that this brings us back to the 5 savoirs and reminds us of course, knowledge, but also interpreting, relating. How can we explain things in a different way so that it's relatable to this foreign person? How can we interact with this foreign person to respectfully explain a local custom? This process is going to expand our ability to critically evaluate our own customs and our own traditions. And it might possibly affect our development of attitudes, of positive attitudes, of respectful and openness. So I encourage you to try this out sometime. It's actually a bit of fun, as I said, but it can also be an eye-opening experience. One classic way of developing intercultural competence is also cultural exchange. Cultural exchange, study abroad, and most of the literature says that a study abroad experience is said to have a positive impact on the development of intercultural competence. This is generally a truth. Even short stays can have a significant impact, in fact. So even a few days, a week, can have a positive impact if there is significant reflection on the experience, if there's significant discussion and preparation for the experience. The longer term the stay is, of course, the more impact it will have on a student, though the medium term is actually the most impactful. Because once a person gets to a very long stay in a foreign place, there's a lot of adaptation that happens. And so the impact maybe, it's actually a U curve that, the longer you stay in a foreign place, the impact that it will have on your intercultural competence. Interestingly, these benefits may be long-term. They're seeing that in longitudinal studies, they're seeing that these effects stay on for a time. But this all depends, as I said, with the amount of engagement the students actually have with the foreign culture. If the students are living with families, if they have a work experience or volunteer work, something similar, they're engaging more intensely with the foreign culture, these experiences will have more impact, of course. One study that I read says that even if the students don't significantly engage with the local culture, just the fact that many students go to this foreign culture to study together and they're interacting with all of these other students and all of these other students from other cultures, that actually leads to them challenging these preconceived ideas about other cultures. So that's another quite interesting effect of this experience abroad. If we can do this and if we can be exposed to several cultures, various cultures, this is going to also increase the effect on intercultural competence. But of course, the significant reflection, I saw it over and over in the research, is that having a very conscientious reflection and engagement about the experience, preparing for the experience, training for the experience, and reflecting on that experience is the most important factor for having an effective study abroad or stay abroad. Interestingly, this experience is especially impactful for students from a lower socioeconomic status, presumably them having less opportunities or fewer opportunities to experience through travel. They have a rather large impact through this experience. Of course, this is not always possible for many factors. So, but this is an incredibly impactful experience. If we can't travel abroad, then we can also provide these experiences in a different way in our classroom. And so I don't know if this is common in India, but it's becoming more and more popular around the world. I've done it for the last few years with one of my classes, and this is a COIL project. A COIL project is a virtual exchange. So it makes things much easier. Students stay in their home. They stay in their classes. They stay in their own university. But through one class, we can connect to another classroom in a different country and do a collaborative project. And this is an extremely interesting, I think, opportunity, because it creates the opportunity to have an intercultural exchange, an intercultural experience without actually having to move, to go anywhere. And so this virtual exchange usually culminates in a project. It's a collaborative, necessarily, project, so that the students work closely together and they have to mediate and negotiate and work on creating a final project together. There's little literature, of course, on these because it's relatively new. But so far, what they've seen is that COIL projects do seem to develop intercultural competence, especially in students who have not had the opportunity to go abroad. It tends to, of course, contribute to their digital literacies, because necessarily all of this collaboration is occurring online and through digital media. It, of course, increases their language skills, and it is also, interestingly, reduces their anxiety and contributes to their self-confidence when speaking in this foreign language. And so these are all positive, I think, consequences, of course, for our English language development and our intercultural competence. So this is a very interesting project that is a possibility, and through personal experience, I can absolutely say that it's a challenge, but it's also worthwhile. And the students, almost all of my students, usually say, you know, it was a great experience, and they appreciate the experience. So, so this is one more possibility. I'd like to also propose co-teaching. Co-teaching is one of my research interests as well, because we've been doing a lot of co-teaching in my university. Co-teaching, if you're not familiar, is the relationship between two professors or two instructors that teach a class together. So this might happen, as you can see here. This is me with my colleague teaching a class together in the same room. We had the entire group together. This is one model of co-teaching, but another model of co-teaching, which we're also doing, the same colleague and I are doing now, it could be station teaching, where I teach one topic to half the group, he teaches another topic to the other half of the group, and then we switch groups and teach the same topic again, so that they're getting the experience with both teachers, but by seeing complementary topics in the same subject. Co-teaching is teaching a subject in a collaborative way, while planning the subject together, evaluating the students together. It involves a lot of collaboration and a lot of work together. But it can be actually quite interesting for the students and beneficial for the students, because they get two perspectives necessarily from their different teachers and their different instructors. They get complementary feedback from the different instructors, and they say that it tends to give them a lot more attention, personalized attention, individualized attention, which can be of course beneficial for learning. I propose co-teaching also as a way to develop intercultural competence when these two teachers are from different cultures. In this instance, I've taught with this colleague of mine who is Spanish. I'm American, and so we bring different perspectives to the classroom, and we can make this transparent to our students very easily and allow them to see things from both perspectives. And this is a very powerful model, I believe. In fact, we did a study that you see here at the bottom. We found that co-teaching is valuable to students as a collaborative model. They see us collaborating, and they see us working together to provide this class in a collaborative way. And so this can be a very powerful image for students. And of course, there are other studies that say that intercultural competence is necessary for the instructors themselves, of course, when pairing a non-native speaker with a native speaker, and as instructors. In a very similar way, there is the role of foreign language assistants. Foreign language assistants are in use in many parts of the world. In Spain, we have a very large program that employs language assistants in bilingual schools, in primary schools and secondary schools. And language assistants are an incredible resource to provide cultural knowledge and provide, of course, a nice language model, a fluent language model. But for intercultural competence, they can be an essential tool. They can be a very valuable resource. Another place that they have a lot of language assistance, there's a very large program in Japan, the JET program, also in Korea and a couple other places, but these are the largest programs. A few programs do provide language assistance at the university level. For example, in the British Council in the UK, they employ language assistants from other countries that come to universities in the UK. But it's mainly something that happens in primary and secondary schools. There's also a small program in Spain near Madrid that also employs language assistants in a CLIL program at the university level. The results so far It's true that the cultural exposure from language assistance is not always as effective as we would like. Why? Because the role of the assistants is not always very clear. And so this is something that needs to be improved, but I think has an enormous potential for intercultural competence. Having a foreign person in the classroom that's assisting the teacher, that is helping the students, supporting the students, is an extremely, extremely valuable asset. They provide the reason to speak English. If we have a Spanish teacher teaching English to Spanish children, then having a foreign person from the United States, from South Africa, from Australia in that classroom creates a reason, a need to communicate in English. And also a constant cultural resource that we can ask them about how do they do things in their country? Why do they do things that way? And so on. It creates that need for mediation between languages as well. It's a very valuable resource. Having any foreign person in our classroom has, as you can imagine, has great potential for intercultural competence, allows our students to gain curiosity, allows for intercultural dialogue, and of course also that linguistic mediation, that we can employ communicative strategies to make sure that we're understood even across cultures. And so this is the end of my talk. I hope it's been very interesting, and I hope it's been useful. I hope that you've been able to reflect a bit on culture, intercultural attitudes, intercultural competences. But I very strongly believe that this is an essential task for educators to develop intercultural competence among students, starting at a young age and continuing through the university years. This is a lifelong goal. This is something that is not done in just a few years, and it's something that's very gradual, little by little. I think that if we continue to work toward this, our future generations will be very open to respectful dialogue, to effective collaboration, and in this way we can have collaboration that stretches across the national boundaries and opportunities for development, opportunities to develop all of our soft skills, our empathy, our understanding, our respect and adaptability. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for the all-encompassing and quite a fascinating presentation. This because it has almost all the elements that an educator in the classroom could think of, starting from socio-linguistic, pragmatic, and most importantly, intercultural competence as a kind of andragogical framework, especially in the context of higher education, is truly fascinating. And most importantly, co-teaching is something that really opens up a lot of avenues for collaborative research and probably any kind of exchange programs if you incline to. Ma'am, I'll also talk to you about that personally on a personal note. And besides that, ma'am, your presentation was so eclectic in the sense that you can use this kind of framework maybe at the policy level, at the curriculum level, maybe at the course design level, and most importantly, even at the assessment level. So, and these aspects makes your topic so fascinating and so befitting to this conference that it very much resonates with the theme of the conference. Thank you very much, ma'am, for such a scintillating and wonderful presentation. Now let me throw the floor open for questions. I request the participants to keep the questions short without much follow-ups so that we can maximize the number of questions for the participants. So let me throw the floor open for questions. So I'll moderate the questions, ma'am.
Okay.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Hello, ma'am. I am a sixth scholar at the Institute. What made me curious was at the introduction part, the metaphor of a fish in a bowl. So by extension, we would think an individual getting displaced from this culture. As he moved to a fish, he moved to a different bowl. So I wanted to know your thoughts or your ideas about the relationship between intercultural competence in the domain of education, which this presentation was about, and the intercultural competence, thought of in a more general and overarching manner that affects individual identity due to change of cultural context. So basically, how the general intercultural competence one has and develops will affect the learner intercultural competence in education. So basically, his individuality, his identity is subject to change. So how would that translate into this educational domain?
Sorry, there's a bit of echo. I think I understood your question to be about individual identity.
How the change in an individual identity, due to cultural change, would affect his education?
Sure. I mean, I believe that it would affect our individual identity in some way, but I wouldn't suggest that intercultural competence would change our beliefs or change our identity significantly. Rather, it would increase our ability to understand other individuals and other individual realities. And so rather than change our own identity, it's about opening ourselves up to other identities and understanding how we can effectively communicate, how we can effectively collaborate. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. That very much answers the question. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Any other
Thank
questions?
Very good, ma'am. I really enjoyed your lecture and how you share your experiences. I have just two questions, ma'am. Being an Indian, we have a lot of cultures and here a lot of diversity. So often I see that culture and religion are very closely linked and connected. And sometimes it becomes very sensitive to touch upon that in classrooms. So how do we deal with that? And second one is, how can the internet and social media platforms be used to promote ICC? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your questions. It's true that culture, religion can be very, very sensitive. We also have some diversity in our classrooms here, not so much religious, but more cultural. And I think that we have to first create and build an environment of trust and an environment of comfort in our classrooms. I think that's essential, so that if we can build a safe environment so that our students are comfortable, discussing these types of topics, discussing different religions, different cultures, different aspects, then we can create an environment in which we can develop these competences toward the exterior. But of course, we have to create this respect and openness and mutual understanding, mutual comprehension, and respect within the classroom first, which is not an easy task, of course, I'm sure. But little by little, I think that we can do this. The second question was, I'm sorry, regarding?
Yeah, the internet and social media platforms, technology, can be used to promote ICC.
Absolutely. Technology has opened our world and made it much more transparent and much more readily accessible. I think that technology can be a huge asset when developing intercultural competence. We have, it can be an asset. It can also be a hindrance in the fact that we have lots of information. We almost have too much information. Well, we do have too much information. We have so that we have to train our students to be critical and to identify useful sources, to identify reliable sources of information and firsthand sources. So that's something that we have to be very careful to do. But at the same time, we can allow our students to do research. We can allow our students to connect directly with other students or with other people around the world. We can have them ask for information directly to other institutions, other schools. There are quite a few ways that we can do this. For example, through COIL, that's an excellent way of connecting people and doing something collaborative and meaningful by using internet and by using the media, social media. So we can do this through many different applications, and I think it's very effective.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions? Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you, ma'am, for giving an elaborate definitions and also some examples. I'm teaching MA English students in Africa. So I'm teaching this particular subject, Introduction to Cultural Studies. Ma'am, you mentioned about extensive programs in Japan and free programs also. Can you give me some more details regarding these programs, ma'am? So that we can make our students do this, join these programs. Thank you.
The programs you're referring to, for example, the COIL programs, or what programs exactly? Sorry, was she referring to the COIL programs or?
Now I want to know more about free programs as well as extensive programs, ma'am, so that I can tell more thing about these programs to my students who are learning English and they are in Africa. They are learning this cultural studies paper. They are pursuing MA English. So I want to give more details regarding these programs,
ma'am. I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure which programs you're referring to, because most things are something that you can do in your classroom, and you can try and connect with. For example, there are programs in which we have language assistance, or there are programs in which we can connect our classroom to another classroom in a foreign country. For example, the COIL program. Many of these programs require some institutional support. For example, COIL is something that would require a bit of, first, either an international connection through the instructors. This is how I got involved. Was I know some people in the United States, of course, that are also teaching at university level. And so we connected our classrooms directly. There's also some institutions, and mine is starting now, that are starting to create these international opportunities, international connections with other universities. And so this is a possibility. There are, I don't know of the exact names or the exact links, but I think there are platforms in which they connect to other universities so that you can find a partner in a foreign country. The same with foreign language assistance. It's something that would have to happen a little bit sort of top down from the institution that could support you in employing a foreign language assistant. So unfortunately, there aren't any, I think, easy ways to make those things happen, but we do need some institutional support.
We don't have much time for questions, because we have just a half-hour session between for lunch. Thank you very much, ma'am. But the real challenge I see is at one end of the spectrum. If you look at India, the National Curriculum Policy (NCF), it very much advocates localization of material, indigenization, and at one end of the spectrum, you have this globalization and making the materials all-encompassing for the global learner. So that's a kind of a fine, delicate balance. And the real challenge I see is just blending and catering to the requirements of both localized as well as globalized audience. How do you see that, ma'am? With that response, we can end the session.
Yeah, it is a challenge. It's a very big challenge, because I think that we cannot move forward and globalize everything and leave things behind. Absolutely. We need to preserve our indigenous cultures, our languages, our minority languages and minority cultures, because it's part of us and it's part of who we are. But I don't think we have to leave that behind while we still can, lend a hand or stretch a hand to someone across national boundaries. I think it's something that, before you asked about individual identities, I don't think you have to leave your individual identity or your essence behind in order to make those collaborations possible. So I think it's just a matter of opening yourself up, but not forgetting, of course, where you came from. I think it's something that we can do both. So that's my hope.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you for the fascinating session. I'll be in touch with you, ma'am. Maybe we can just talk about future collaborations and research opportunities, because we are really excited here to look at this prospect of intercultural communication. So that could really open up a lot of prospects in future. Looking forward to your collaborations in future, and thank you so much for joining. I'm sure that the audience were truly delighted to have you for today's session. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you again. Thank you very much.